Ahsoka is a character who's been loved for well over a decade. There's been a lot of hype around this series, and because of the hype, I wanted to take a look and see if this is going to live up to what people are saying about it. I'm personally a huge fan of Ahsoka, so I'm going to watch regardless, but this video is for anyone who's teetering on the edge of whether or not they should devote their time to the show. I'm going to be talking about the first episode in the series because that's the one that's supposed to draw your interest and make you want more. Let's get into it. The problems start with the opening crawl. I'm completely fine with the crawl being different from the mainline ones, but the red text slowly sliding up the screen in a way that's meant to be ominous and draw you in looked really odd, and because of that, it fell emotionally flat for me. This is only the opening though, so let's get into the actual story. We open on a bridge of a New Republic ship, and the captain gets informed that a ship is trying to enter using an old Jedi code. This man is clearly old enough to remember who the Jedi are and how dangerous they were, yet he decides the best course of action in this case is to call their bluff. Even if he doesn't remember the Jedi, surely the story of Vader's exploits would make him a little more wary. This decision of course ends in his death, which could have been completely avoided if he confirmed the identity of who was coming on his ship before he let them on his ship. These two going on a killing spree looks really cool though, so a silver lining I guess. We cut to Ahsoka walking through a ruin on a Korriban knockoff. Her costume looks alright, but the head tentacles look too much like a prop and not enough like a part of her head. There are quite a few times where they look more like a headdress, and I think the shades of color play a big part in that. The Indiana Jones vibes of the chamber Ahsoka finds the map in feel more true to the spirit of Indy than the movie that came out this year, but that's a topic for another day. When Ahsoka leaves the chamber, droids try to stop her, only to resort to self-destruction when she takes two of them out. I do find it odd that they have to be completely intact and still to self-destruct. I also find it odd that whoever sent these droids equipped them to fight Jedi, but then made their last resort relatively easy for a Jedi to escape. If the droids could self-destruct while following Ahsoka, they could probably chase her down, and the show's title wouldn't have made too much sense after that. When Ahsoka gets back on the ship, she's met by a Jedi droid. I never watched the Mandalorian show, so I don't know if he's in that, but the only thing I can think of when I hear Jedi droids is the one that raised the Jedi Prince in the EU, and trust me, that is the most sensical part of that particular story. It is a little annoying that I probably have to watch The Mandalorian to see where the droid came from, because doing a homework assignment before you can enjoy a standalone piece of media sucks. I understand that I'm stepping into a part of a large overarching story, and I'm going to be a little behind on certain things, but it's probably not the best idea to have someone confused as to how something came about this early. This is the first episode, so I accept that I'm not going to know everything, but the things I don't know should fill me with curiosity, not confusion. They succeed in making me curious about Baylan and Shin, so it's not like the show is incapable of pulling this off. The Jedi droid might seem like a small thing, and on its own it is, but when the little things start adding up and you start noticing things like the lack of weight in duels or the dull cinematography, the overall product suffers as a result. Hera greets Ahsoka when she arrives at the New Republic cruiser, and I think her appearance was handled pretty well. Fans of the Rebels TV show get to have their "I know that character, she was in that thing I like" moment, and new people get all that they need from Ahsoka acknowledging her as a general. It's quick and to the point, just like all these appearances should be. Hera does look a little too human, but it's fine. It's a bit jarring in the meeting room, but outside of that she looks fine. Ahsoka shows Hera the artifact she got from the ruins, and it's revealed to be a map our current characters can't read. Stop me if you've heard this before. I am really done with maps in Star Wars. It hasn't quite been done into the ground, but we are well on our way. I do not want to have another story where the main characters have to find another piece of a map to find some person or something. We did it in The Force Awakens, we did it in The Rise of Skywalker, we've done it here. The ridiculousness of the knife map in The Rise of Skywalker left a bad taste in a lot of fans' mouth, so maybe we shouldn't hinge our intro on a sour memory. In all fairness, Dave Filoni makes millions to write these stories, so what do I know? Sabine is apparently really good at reading maps, which I don't remember her doing in Rebels, but it's been so long since that show occurred in the timeline, I could see her gaining that skill to look for Ezra in the time that passed. As I'm writing this, I'm 99% sure that's what happened, and I don't feel like proving myself wrong, so let's stick with that. Sabine is introduced with rock music playing in the background. I really don't think rock music has a place in Star Wars properties. Star Wars is meant to be a deeply moving space opera centered around personal drama and how it shapes galactic galactic conflict, working as an allegory for the instability of real-world politics through a semi-fantasy, semi-science fiction lens. The music in Star Wars is atmospheric, and it pretty much made the franchise. Rock music is great, and I would have appreciated it for a character intro in any other franchise, but it just doesn't fit. I can understand feeling as though Star Wars should be able to transform beyond one certain thing, and I agree. But changing the vibe of the second or third most iconic thing in your franchise randomly doesn't work for me. Now that I'm done sounding like Red Foreman, I will say that I'm glad to see Sabine, and she didn't feel too jarring for me. Some people online said Sabine was acting out of character, but I didn't pick up on that at all. She felt pretty much in line with who I remember her as. Ahsoka and Sabine have an interesting dynamic, with Ahsoka having attempted to train Sabine as a Jedi only to realize she wasn't ready. Given her temperament and decision making, this might have been the right choice. In this very episode, Sabine completely disregards Ahsoka's advice and runs off with the map, ultimately leading to the map being stolen by Balin's forces. She seemingly does this just because she hates Ahsoka so much she wants to find Ezra on her own, which is really dumb. Sabine shouldn't be so angry about not becoming a Jedi that she would lessen her chances of finding Ezra. I know the two will become begrudging companions later on, but as of Sabine opening the map, she seemingly just thought that Ahsoka's skills weren't worth being around her, and that should just not be how Sabine thinks. I did enjoy the fight between Shin and Sabine and how well the skill gap is shown between them. There isn't a single moment in that duel where Shin is in the slightest bit of danger, and I think that's where Darksiders thrive in Star Wars. When a Sith is just stage managing and twirling their mustache until they get tired of the opponent, we get some of the best scenes in Star Wars. I know Sabine survives her stab wound, and that does somewhat minimize the threat level of lightsabers, but I'm not going to count it against this particular episode. Overall, I'd give this episode a 6.5 out of 10, and I probably wouldn't recommend it unless you really liked Rebels. I've already been spoiled on all the major overarching plot points, and I'm going to give an overview on my opinion of what I've seen without watching the context. Here's a spoiler warning. This is a list of the spoilers I've seen, and you get to hear my blind opinion on them. When it comes to zombies, I'm glad that Star Wars is dipping into its horror potential, but putting them up against people who can one-shot them easily and just don't do so takes away from the mystique of it all. This would have been a lot better if someone like Han came across them. Having someone who is grounded in what he can see, having reality stretch beyond his imagination once before, then having him adjust to his world being flipped upside down once again would be interesting. You might wonder why I like having horror in Star Wars, but not rock music. Put simply, there have always been elements of horror in Star Wars. It's a fundamental part of Vader's approach throughout the original trilogy. Rock music just does not fit. Thrawn showing up slightly scratches the nostalgia part of my brain, and I'm really glad Pelion is around, but I don't think the conflict with Thrawn will be nearly as emotionally rewarding as the trilogy was. There's no Joruus to act as a symbol that Luke has to destroy to progress into being ready to establish the Jedi Order, so the main emotional conflict is probably going to be between Luke and Thrawn, who are so distant character-wise that there won't really be room for nuance in the two opposing each other. I'm glad they found Ezra after all this time. I was really stressed in middle school when he got transported away, and from what I've seen, the live action Ezra is pretty well acted, so that's good. But every time I see new Jedi show up in these pre-TFA stories, I always wonder what insane bloodbath led to them all being gone by the time Rey comes around. The introduction of Abeloth is pretty interesting to me. Thrawn and Abeloth being introduced around the same time probably shouldn't have happened. It's like introducing Sauron and Darth Vader at the same time. These two characters are enough on their own to be a main focus of a movie trilogy. I think that if the new Rey movie does good, they will set Abeloth's appearance later in the timeline so Rey can be involved in the final battle. But if things continue as they have, I think that they'll have the Abeloth confrontation right after the one with Thrawn, which again will not be done as well as it was in the EU. I'm going to do my best to judge these stories on their own, but that's going to be pretty hard when I've seen these same stories done well already. Dave Filoni and the rest of the crew hit it out the park with the Clone Wars, so I know he can make great stories. We'll see if he can get back to that level.